Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us here on the Father Show. And I'm your host, Mike Thompson. Today, we have a great show for you, and we're going to be talking to a psychologist, excuse me. And I actually read his article about father and son and masculinity, and I really wanted to bring it on the show. So I'm so happy to have him on the show to talk about it, and he can tell us a little bit more about that article. But before we get started, if you have not subscribed to our YouTube channel, please go to our YouTube channel, to the Father Show with Mike Thompson, and click on subscribe. And while you're there, hit that notification bell so that way every week when we have a show, you'll be notified and you don't even have to think about it. Now, also, for all the men out there that are looking for resources, things that can help you with any situation that you may be in, invite you to go to the Father Show with MikeThompson.com. Click on resources, and there you can find resources that are national and statewide. So whether you need something on, say, for instance, suicide, that's a national, you'll get the information there. Maybe our guest today, John, will have his information on our website, and he's located in Stony Brook, New York. So if you're in New York, or if you're in Kansas, or any state you may be in, we have resources there for you. If you can't find what you're looking for, please shoot me an email at thefathershow@gmail.com and let me know what you're looking for, and I'll do my very best to find it and get that information over to you. So today, ladies and gentlemen, as I mentioned, we have a psychiatrist. And I'm going to let John kind of introduce himself. I'm going to do a little different today. I'm going to let him give you a little bit of information about him, about his background, and who he is, because I think he can tell you the story better than I can. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome John to the show. John, how you doing?
Very good, Mike. Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you on your show, and thank you for the work that you do. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you. It's definitely a pleasure to have you, and I really appreciate you coming on the show, because when I read that article, I really wanted to discuss that a little more. But before we get into it, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about you? Because I know you have your own private practice,
Mhm.
and you also have a blog that you do as well.
Sure. So I'm a psychologist in private practice in Stony Brook, New York. I've been here in private practice since 2007. Before that, I was actually in research. I was doing psychiatry and neuroscience research at the Zucker Hillside Hospital, which is in Queens. And before that, I was working at the Stony Brook University Counseling Center there. But I've been here in private practice since 2007, and recently, over the last few years, I also work with the psychiatry department. I supervise psychiatry residents
Okay.
in their clinical work. Um, for the past 3 years, in addition, I've been a contributor to Psychology Today, which is where you saw the article that I had written about fathers and
Mm-hmm.
sons. And so, speaking of and apropos of that, I am both a father and a son. And so, I use my experience in both cases to inform my perspective on the article, as well as my clinical work with patients where I work with, well, fathers and sons.
Okay.
And
Eh,
so,
Yeah. And what type of patients do you work with?
mhm,
Is it like
good question.
fathers, sons, married couples, teenagers, adolescents?
Yeah, well, that's so good question. My office is across the street from Stony Brook University, and so I get a lot of people affiliated with the university. Many of them are students, so many of them are in the sort of 18 to 30 range or so. Could be undergraduate students, graduate students, med students. But I'm in the community, and so I also get people in the community who are a bit older, maybe parents themselves, grandparents even, And I have a men's group in the practice
Hmm.
here that spans several generations, and it's really an interesting group. It's an interesting experience because the younger guys get to expose the older guys to some of the newer things that are going on in the world now, and the older guys have this wisdom that they're able to teach the younger guys some things from experience, and it's a really good dynamic having a cross generational dialogue like that. So I really have the full spectrum in my practice here.
Okay, and that's I agree with what you're saying in regards to having the younger people learn from the older people because when we were growing up, that's kind of how what I would say when I was growing up because you're much younger than I am. But when I was growing up, that's how we learn. And one of the reasons I even do this show is so that other men can teach men of their own age, even older sometimes, and even younger about what's going on so that they don't make the mistakes that we have probably made.
Mhm.
And because I really want men to become and when I say this on the show all the time, that men, I want, this is about getting knowledge so that you can be the best version of yourself. And that's what I want. So that men's group, can you elaborate a little bit about the men's group and what you do?
Sure. We have a session, part of the group session where we all sort of check in, or they would check in and just talk a little bit about some of the challenges that they're facing in the recent past, the past couple of weeks or so. But every now and then, we'll have a topic, an article, or a video to watch that we'll kind of reflect on and give thoughts and opinions on. And people have different opinions based on their age or their demographic background or where they are, what phase of life. But when someone's really dealing with a personal struggle, relationship struggle, or family struggle, it is really helpful and interesting to get the perspectives of other people who are in a different part of their life or a phase of life. So we have
Mm-hmm.
some of the younger guys in the group who only have the experience of being a son. They don't have the experience of being a father. And to get to hear from guys who are fathers, or in some cases fathers and grandfathers, uh, it really provides them a different insight as to what their own fathers might be thinking in their interactions with them, and vice versa. A lot of the times, even though we all grow up, as boys, and we have fathers. When we get older, and we have our own sons, sometimes there's so many years of distance that we forget what it's like to be that age or at that stage in life. And so it's good to be reminded from some of the younger guys
Mm-hmm.
what some of the things actually sound like to them. That seems like it makes so much sense to us, but to them it's just ridiculous or lunacy or you know
Yeah,
the phrase
because
now is okay boomer, as you know.
so it's kind of like a mentorship and really both directions because the younger men are kind of mentoring the older and the older are kind of mentoring the younger if needed.
Right, right, exactly. And this group I started because in my personal life I have a personal men's group of friends and family members that also spans several generations, and that group has been so successful in my personal life. All of my best friends are in that group, that I
Hmm.
said, I could really take this into my private practice, and once I did, it really has worked really well in a number of cases. Well, really throughout the entire process of the group. So
Wow, that's great. Well, I know I would say that it would definitely be nice to have a psychotherapist in your circle of friends.
sometimes it's a blessing and sometimes it's a curse.
Absolutely. I can see that. But I kind of wish I had one in my real close circle of friends, somebody I can really bounce off things to. I seem to be the person that people want to bounce things off of.
Hmm.
And it's like, okay, that's great, but I need somebody to bounce things off of.
Hmm. Yeah, that's something that I find the need for a lot. And I'm fortunate I have different men in my life that serve different roles and different purposes
Hmm.
for me. And some men in my life are therapists themselves and have a good ear for that, and some men have more blue collar jobs and have a very different kind of take, but sometimes that's what I need. A good friend of mine is the fire chief in our town,
Hmm.
and he's also the head of EMS, and he has a different take on some of the day-to-day struggles that I might have than one of my friends who's a psychologist or a
Right.
professor or so on and so forth. So it's really good to have people in your life, not only in different ages and generations, but really from different walks of life, because they're going to have a different perspective on the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So let's kind of get into this article. And the article was called Fathers and Son, Masculinity, Men, and Relationships. Can you tell us what that is, the title? What is that really about?
Sure. Um, well, I guess, one of the things to talk about, there's the obvious, which is the family relationship of fathers and sons, but then underneath it is this notion of masculinity and what masculinity means. And masculinity is something that has been in the process of being redefined for the past century, but especially the past 5, 10, 15, 20 years.
Hmm.
And a lot of the things that were once considered part of traditional masculinity are now being considered, toxic masculinity and things of that nature. And, um, you know, it's very, it's the place that we have come from as a people, as a society, is very different than the world that we live in
Hmm.
now. The industrial revolution and the technological revolution of the past 150 years has changed the world in very significant ways, such that many of our survival tasks and day-to-day tasks used to be overwhelmingly physical. And in a
Hmm.
physical world, uh, men who on average typically have larger bodies, more muscle mass, tended to do most of those jobs. And as a result, um, society was organized around physical labor and masculinity in that respect.
Yeah.
But over the last 100 years, especially, our survival tasks and our jobs have increasingly become more intellectual and more emotional, as evidenced by the work that I do and some of the work that you do as well. And in that world, women have the opportunity to play on an even playing surface. And so the norms have changed a bit because women have been able to enter the workforce and in public life in increasing numbers. And so that has changed a bit what the norms look like for what it means to be a man in the world and what it means to be a man in public life. 100 years ago, 150 years ago, and in generations prior to that, the world was a place that, for men, placed a tremendous value on toughness, aggressiveness. Um, the socialization circles for boys and men were very similar to what and Steven Pinker, who wrote the famous book The Better Angels of Our Nature, amongst other books. The social circles for boys and men very similar to the pecking order of the animal kingdom, the animal
Hmm.
world, where essentially you have animals, usually males, fighting to establish who's going to be the alpha, and then who's the beta, and who's the delta, and who's the gamma, and so on and so forth. And based on those battles, the victor would get to eat, you know,
Mm-hmm.
the first of everybody else, and would be the first to be able to pick out a mate, and so on and so forth. So, in this pecking order kind of system, um, your toughness is rewarded, and you don't want to show any kind of vulnerability or weakness, because if you show vulnerability or weakness, um, the individuals below you in the pecking order will sniff that out and will then try to, you know, usurp you in the pecking order or take your place. So I think for generations, if not thousands of years, we've been socialized as boys and men by our fathers, by our elders in our socialization circles,
Mm-hmm.
uncles and elders, um, to not show weakness, to not show vulnerability. And that served a purpose when men were primarily hunting and fighting in wars all the time, everyday men. But in today's world, it's very different. And so an unwillingness to show vulnerability, an unwillingness to show weakness, really has a negative impact on the things that are most prevalent in our experience today as men, which is our relationships with women, and our relationships with one another. So I wanted to kind of explore this. In a previous article, I had explored a little bit more about what I would call the unwritten rules of boyhood and girlhood, and how we're socialized very differently.
Mm-hmm.
But in this article, I wanted to look at how the experience of being socialized in this pecking order type of system influences our relationships with our fathers and our sons, in that very often, um, we will debate things, and we will take a harsh stance with each other because we have been trained not to show vulnerability or
Mm-hmm.
weakness. And it was my hope. This article was published right before Father's Day. It was my hope that we could look at Father's Day as an opportunity to revisit some of these things, to revisit our relationships with our fathers and our sons, and perhaps take a step back and maybe be a little bit more willing to show some vulnerability or weakness, or acknowledge wrongdoing in any respect.
Yeah, and I have, when I read the article, I thought about my relationship with my sons, and I didn't raise them to not show emotions or not show vulnerability. But I can see, like when I say my son, I love you, and he's like, yeah, Dad, okay, I love you too. you know, it's a thing that he still feels maybe he's being too emotional or too vulnerable, or
Mhm.
and I'm like, where did you learn that? I mean, is it? And I know it's not. I don't know if it's from peers, and that's what I'm thinking, because I've never taught him that. I never taught him to be that way. But and he's a great kid, loving, son, and but he's never been a one that likes confrontations either.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Well, first of all, kudos to you for expressing an openness to your son to be more emotional and tender, and to show vulnerability. So, like you said, though, I think there are influences outside of the family relationships that have a major impact on us.
Mm-hmm.
All of the media that we consume, you know, if you look at, you know, most of the movies that we see, especially, the big blockbuster movies that we see, whether they're, any of the Marvel movies, or even just, Top Gun that just came out, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever the movies may be, um, the leading male figures are generally figures who model a certain level of toughness without, showing much vulnerability or weakness. And that was
Mm-hmm.
certainly true of the old cowboy movies
Oh
from a
yeah.
generation ago, Dirty Harry and even Terminator and
Yeah,
so
John
on and so
Wayne.
forth. John Wayne, right? And so, and that those movies really told the story and continue to tell the story of what masculinity means for a certain segment of the population. And in certain cases, they are still held up as models or role models. But, in the world moving forward, um, masculinity is evolving.
Hmm.
And, we also live in a world still in 2022 where I think amongst boys, there's still a lot of fear and anxiety about someone maybe labeling them as gay or something like that. And
Hmm.
so a lot of times, boys or even men will shy away from showing any kind of softness or affection in that regard because they're afraid someone is going to call them gay
Now,
or something like that.
now, do you see that just among the men, or you see it with their relationship with their female, their wife or the girlfriend, or
That in terms of the
the
not showing
vulnerability
vulnerability and,
and
and stuff.
masculinity? Yeah.
I think in the younger generations, I'm a Gen Xer, and so then after Gen X, you had the millennials, and then now Gen Z. I guess my kids are both Gen Z. I think with each passing generation, I see less and less of it, and I just see
Hmm.
how my son, who's 17, communicates with his friends. I was just having a conversation with somebody else who was also a Generation X person, and we were talking about how it was typical in our generation for boys to just, I don't know, punch each other in the crotch or do something really stupid or mean to each other and just find it funny. And you just accepted that as funny. And today, the kids would rightly call that out as being mean, or bullying or something like that.
Hmm.
So, but times change. So I think, uh, boys now are more likely to uh, feel more comfortable than perhaps you and I ever did expressing sensitivity, expressing vulnerability, and
Now,
that's informing their relationships with girls.
do you think that's the reason why we see more and hear more about bullying than we did like in my generation and probably your generation?
Yeah, I think that's the case. I think there has been an effort to try to nip things in the bud, and there are lots of potential reasons for it. Again, I think Steven Pinker has his reasons for it that he explains, and but other possibilities are, we've seen a lot of school shootings and mass
Hmm.
shootings, and I think there's been this sort of mentality for a while of we have to nip things in the bud, prevent bullying before it gets to that point. Whether or not all of those situations are related to bullying or not, I know there's some questions about that, but I think we've looked at some of these situations. One of the biggest songs of my generation, when I was in high school in the '90s, was the song by Pearl Jam, "Jeremy," and it was all about this, boy who was, bullied and, uh, but ended up, creating havoc, for everyone around him, and aggressiveness and violence, and um, so I think there's been an effort to try to nip these things in the bud to kind of learn from past generations and past mistakes. But I definitely see the more current generations uh, taking a different tack as it relates to boys expressing vulnerability, weakness, sensitivity, availing themselves to psychotherapy like what I do, or going down to their school psychologist, or anything like that, in numbers that are much greater than previous generations.
Yeah. And why would you think, and I think it's a kind of a dumb question though, but why do you think girls are able to express their feelings and their emotions better than boys? And I agree with you. It seems that as the generations and generations keeps coming, the seas and the you see changing, and you see
Mhm.
the younger men being more vulnerable. And the part that you know I see also is, and I always say is important, is what girls think a man is. You
Mm.
know, that plays a part in a young man showing vulnerability. But why do you think there's girls can be more vulnerable than the boys?
Yeah, great question. And so, one of the older articles that I had written that I referenced in the Father's Day article, I talk a little bit about the differences in socialization between boys and girls. And so, if the paradigm that boys are raised in is something similar to the pecking order that we see with animals. For girls, it's very different. My daughter was in the Girl Scouts, and they typically sing a song at the end of their Girl Scout meetings. And so the lyrics of the song is called Make New Friends. And so the lyrics of the song is make new friends, but keep the old. One is silver, the other is gold. A circle is round, it has no end. That's how long I will be your friend. A fire burns bright, it warms the heart. We've been friends from the very start. You have one hand, I have the other. Put them together, we have each other. Silver is gold, silver is precious, gold is too. I am precious, and so are you. You help me, and I'll help you, and together we will see it through. I couldn't imagine boys standing together in a circle holding hands singing that song, right? But the girls, this is typical for them in the way that they are socialized from a very young age. They are socialized, I think, to um, see and understand the expression of vulnerability as not something that is a sign of weakness, but as a sign of strength. That you are strong enough to invite somebody in to your life and to ask for help when you need it. And I think amongst girls and amongst women, there's much more of sort of a communalistic mentality. And in this type of communalistic environment, one hand washes the other. So, in order for you to get help from somebody else, you need to let somebody know that you're in need of help.
Hmm.
But I think for men, it's the exact opposite. Again, when you show weakness in the pecking order, that's not a sign of strength. That's something that's going to invite other people to attack you or to take you down. So it's very different ways of being socialized.
Yeah, because and I know we as our society, we mirror the animal kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
So as you mentioned earlier, when the lion is the king of his tribe, he
Mm-hmm.
always has to show his strength to keep other male lions out, and also to keep the females in.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't want to see him as weak, because if he's
Right.
weak, then he can't protect us.
Right. No, that's an excellent point. And I think, I have many women patients who have very kind of mixed feelings about a lot of these things.
Hmm.
They, they're amongst the younger generation, I think they're more likely to feel comfortable with men who are more sensitive and allow themselves to show their vulnerabilities. But amongst older women and women of older generations, um, they have come to become comfortable with seeing their man as someone who is tough and doesn't show vulnerability because for them, so much of what they depend on relies on a male figure that is protective and strong
Hmm.
and doesn't show vulnerability.
Hmm.
And, but even amongst the younger women, believe it or not, there's a conflict within them because there is a part of them that is attracted to the stronger, seemingly invulnerable man. That there's a safety, there's a protection in that type of figure. But yet, during the moments when they're in emotional pain, they want their man to also be sensitive and communicative and so on and so forth. Um, so yeah, but we live in a time now where gender roles are there's much more fluidity in terms of gender roles and things of that
Right.
nature. And so on the flip side, you have um, girls and women. I'll tell you, I mean, one of my favorite shows uh, that I watch, and it's a show that I watch with my daughter actually, is American Ninja Warrior. And what's great about
Yeah.
American Ninja Warrior is
Hmm.
that you have women competing on the same course as men. And, many of the women complete this course and a lot of men don't. But you see a level of toughness, a level of physical strength and resilience in
Hmm.
many of these women that is, admirable. That is a very different form of femininity than what previous generations were accustomed to seeing. So
Right.
it's not just masculinity that is being redefined; it's femininity as well.
Yeah, because you would never see my mother going to the gym and doing weight training and being
Right?
on the American Ninja. You know, it's not
Right?
going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't think out of all my aunts and in my family, I can't even see not a one that would have gone onto that show.
Hmm. Right.
So yeah, it's and the funny part is, when you look at it, I know the show is built that, depending on, I think on some of the obstacle course, it depends on your body frame. Because if you're
Hmm.
light,
Right.
like a woman's size, you can get through it better than
Hmm.
a stocky man can, because he's not going to be able to, hold himself all the time or make that leap that they have to make.
Hmm. That's right. Yeah, different parts of you're exactly right. Different parts of the course favor one body type over another, but they don't adjust the course whether
Right.
based on
Right.
whether it's a male or a female. And yeah, and it's incredible. Some of the women, one of the famous ones, Jessie Flex Lebrecht. She's like the best woman in that group, and it's amazing what she's able to accomplish. Uh, she's better than probably the majority of men who do the course.
Yeah, it is amazing. And to see the women now, women have, like you mentioned, it has changed, because usually when a woman go to a gym, it's to lose weight, to tone
Mm,
up a little bit. But you got women going in there that are getting buff.
mm,
And I even dated a girl years ago, and really surprised me because she was Miss Black Colorado, and she went into bodybuilding for a while, and I was like, wow, really? This was, I think I was in my 30s at the time.
mm,
But so this was 30 years ago, and it was amazing to see that. But I think it's great, and it's nice to see the men and women kind of catching up with each other, in a sense of, because, well, let me go back, because in a way that you look at, um, like you mentioned earlier, you have the woman wants a man that's going to protect her, but she
mm,
always want a man that can be vulnerable and
mm,
cry with her. Um, and a lot of women, I've heard a lot of women complain that their man who is very masculine can't come down to that level or
mm,
navigate over to being vulnerable, and then the woman gets upset because she wants her husband to be more vulnerable
mm,
and more open and more conversational. But at the same time, she still wants that masculinity so she can feel protected.
right. We're complex beings, and I think what I've learned in so many different facets of life. I'm a follower and proponent of the philosophy of Taoism, and one of the components of Taoism is an examination of yin and yang. Yin
Mm-hmm.
is sort of the feminine principle, and yang is supposed to be the masculine principle. And at a young age, I started studying yin and yang theory and Taoism, and both of these philosophies place an emphasis on balance. And in order to be balanced, you really need to have an appreciation and a development of both of these sets of traits because different situations require different tools. As you said, on the obstacle course on American Ninja Warrior, there are actually certain elements that having a woman's body is more beneficial for.
Mm-hmm.
And there are other elements that having brute strength and a more masculine body are more beneficial for. And that's really a metaphor for life. American Ninja Warrior is a metaphor for life. So um, different situations in life call for different skills. And I think for both boys and girls, it's my hope that we can, train them in developing both of these traditionally masculine and traditionally feminine
Mm-hmm.
skills so that they can meet whatever challenges, whether they're relationship challenges or just general life challenges that they're going to face in life.
And I think that's why I believe that you see more men saying I stay at home and watch the kids, and women saying, "Hey, I go out and, as we always say, make the bacon."
Mm-hmm.
Because yeah, men are changing, and the woman's view of a man is changing.
Yeah, look, our lives and our jobs are transitory. As you know, you've moved around, from place to place. And in certain areas or certain parts of the country, a woman may have an easier time finding a job in her selected field than a man. And if that's the case, then it would be more beneficial, perhaps, for the woman to be the primary breadwinner and then for the man
Mm-hmm.
to stay home and take care of the family. In other cases, it may be more beneficial for the man to go to work and be the primary breadwinner, and vice versa. So, being able to adapt and adjust to whatever circumstances and situations life throws at you, the more skills that you have in your skill set, the better you'll be able to adapt
Mm-hmm.
as a person, as a couple, as a family.
Yeah. Now, how do the different ways that boys, and I know we've kind of touching on it a little bit already, but how do the different ways that boys and girls are socialized influence the relationship that they have later on in life?
Um, some of it comes from the models that their parents set. And, if we talk about the pecking order again, I think boys, one of the primary environments in which boys are socialized is sports, you know. And so, even though boys don't, um, we're not training boys for subsistence hunting and for regular daily warfare anymore. In certain respects, uh, boys' participation in sports has taken the role of hunting and warfare, and the way coaches and father figures and even older peers in some of these sports environments, the way that they socialize the younger boys, that all sort of has an effect on how boys begin to think of themselves and what aspects of their personality are going to shine through in social situations. And so, I think boys growing up in those environments where they don't want to admit that they're hurt, otherwise they'll get taken out of a game. They don't want to admit that they're vulnerable, otherwise the coach isn't going to put them in. That can filter down into their, romantic relationships once they get into them with women. And for other women, uh, again, I think they've often had the experience with their girlfriends or their other friends that when something's wrong with them, they know that their friend is usually there to lend a sympathetic ear, so they, may be more likely to open up. Um, the classic sort of dynamic that I think it was John Gray in Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus, identified, between men and women is, when men have a problem, they want someone to solve it. When women have a problem, they typically want someone to listen. They don't want someone necessarily stepping in and solving their problem. So, that book was written a generation ago, so take it for what it's worth. But there's still elements of that where, men very often, traditionally socialized men, see a problem and, their immediate thought is to fix the problem.
Hmm.
But for women, when they hear someone has a problem, they're more likely to lend an ear and listen. In the parlance of Al Anon, which is the support group for family members of people in AA, there's a phrase: "Don't just do something, sit there." And so, usually, men are taught to do the opposite: "Don't just sit there, do something."
Yeah.
But you can't know what the right thing is to do very often until you've listened to a person and completely heard them out. Because your initial response to a problem may not be the correct one. You need to kind of hear the full story. And it may turn out, in many cases, that another person just needed to vent. They didn't need you to solve their problem for them, or it wasn't a problem that needed to be solved. So I think for men and women, having an understanding, having an appreciation of some of these differences and what they've been trained to want or to value or to prioritize, just having an understanding of these differences can go a long way.
But that's part of our masculinity, wouldn't you say? That when you come to us, we've got to fix it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I know I'm guilty of it because sometimes my wife would tell me something, and I really, after doing these shows and talking to people like yourself, it's like, okay, should I say something or should I just listen? Do I need to respond or do I just nod and say, okay, acknowledge that I heard you? You know,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and it's a hard thing to do because just really the other day she said, well, honey, I was doing jump ropes and my stomach got upset. And I'm like, okay, should I say something? Or is she looking for me to answer it? And then, later on the day, she said, well, did you hear me? I was this and I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. Should I respond or, are you looking for an answer or are you just, venting?
Right, 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 right. It's hard to know, right?
Yeah,
And we can't be mind readers. And so in each individual relationship, I've been talking in generalities here, but every individual relationship has its own norms and its own needs. And so,
absolutely. Yeah,
obviously there's no substitute for being able to communicate well with your partner to know exactly what they're looking for.
yeah. And that's where they go back when you're looking at relationship. They say communication because, the simple question is, honey, are you looking for an answer or are you just venting? Or, okay, do you need something? And, just asking that open ended question in a sense to
Yeah.
let her know, hey, I heard what you said. I understand what you're feeling. But don't try to fix as men do. We try to fix everything as you mentioned. So don't try to fix everything, but just open up and listen. Or sure, as you said, and I'm gonna put it a different way, shut up and listen,
Right, 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 right. Exactly. Um, yeah, um, I was going to say something. I lost it for a second. Um, and if it comes to me, I'll tell you. But I was
Okay.
going to say something.
Well, let me ask you this. How can his son build a deeper relationship with his father if they currently really don't have one?
Mm, good. Yeah, good question. First, I guess there has to be a willingness on both sides.
Hmm.
If there's a willingness on both sides, and you're just looking for the means to get to the promised land, so to speak, first thing I would say is don't rush it. Um, Things can go awry by trying to do too much and trying to force things. I would say start small around joint activities that two of you enjoy. but don't put too much pressure to have to talk and communicate about your relationship up front or at first.
Okay.
After you have collected a number of experiences together, joint experiences together, you will have built up enough equity with each other to start being more honest and forthcoming with your communication with each other. Excuse me. But I would say don't put too much pressure on in the beginning to have to communicate, because again, I think for men more than women, communication with anybody can be a struggle.
Hmm.
Seeing my son and my daughter develop over time, uh, one of the things that you often hear is that girls develop quicker than boys, particularly verbally, and I've seen that play out, with my son and his peers and my daughter and her peers. Is that it really does seem that the girls get a little bit of a head start in terms of a number of things, particularly with communication. Boys, eventually can catch up if
Hmm.
there's a need or a desire to catch up, but each environment is different, and so if boys stay in environments where communication isn't nearly as valuable as the environments where girls are raised or find themselves, then they might not develop those communication skills. But um, so for a number of boys and men, communication is something that takes a little bit more practice for them and a little bit more time. They can eventually get there,
Hmm.
but I would say, like I said, don't force the issue, knowing that it could be difficult at first. Just spending time together, even if it's spending time in silence, just sharing space with each other, sharing company with each other. Sometimes more can be communicated by putting your arm around somebody
Hmm.
than actually expressing something verbally.
Okay.
And so if touch or something nonverbal comes more naturally, then by all means. I have a dog at home, and it's amazing what we're able to communicate with each other, not being able to speak to each other.
Same
And so,
language.
I
Yeah.
pet her, she licks my face, and so on and so forth. And so, if you can do that with a pet or a dog, you can do that with another person. Probably shouldn't lick, another person's face, but you know.
Yeah. Depends on that person. I don't know, but
Yeah, well,
that's another show.
that's another show.
Well, let me ask you, John, what would be, you mentioned earlier that, you just like three generations in your family, you got your son and your father. What is one thing that you could tell me about your father that he taught you that carried you through your life thus far?
Oh, that's great. I'm glad you asked me that. One of the things that I've always said to my father that I think his greatest gift is his sense of humor. And my father doesn't have the sense of humor where he tells jokes like a comedian. My father has a sense of humor that he is able to take a tense situation and kind of crack a small joke, usually at his own expense, and it totally cuts the tension in the moment. And I think when you're able to understand and use humor, it I like to say that humor is sort of the lubrication of social relationships. Um, Life has a lot of friction in it, and we need some lubrication to kind of help us slide through some difficult situations. And so, sometimes just a small quip, it doesn't have to be, a stand up comedian's joke. It just needs to be something, small and wry or witty that cuts the tension and enables people to loosen up so that they can communicate a little bit more. So, that's something that I've tried to take into all of my relationships, not just my relationship with my son, but the power of humor, and
Mm-hmm.
and having a good sense of humor, trying not to take things too personally, being able to laugh at yourself. That was another thing that my father is really such a great model of, is being able to laugh at himself. And I think if we all were able to laugh at ourselves a bit more and not take ourselves too seriously, our relationships would change and our
Yeah.
interactions would change.
And that's another form of vulnerability, would you say?
You're absolutely right to point that out.
Yeah. Okay. Well, John, I unfortunately that's our time, but I want you to tell the audience how they can get in touch with you and tell them a little bit more about what you're doing and where they can reach you.
Okay, sure. So I have a blog with Psychology Today. It's called The Cube. The reason why I call it The Cube, hold on one second. In my in my office here, I have a Rubik's Cube. It's a solved Rubik's Cube.
Hmm.
And like all cubes, it has 6 sides. And but from any one perspective, the most you can see is 3 sides. From the perspective that I'm showing you now, you can't see the other 3 sides. You don't know what the other 3 colors are. But I'll flip it over for you so that you can see.
Yeah.
So the reason why I call my blog The Cube is because I like to show people different sides of life, because you can't really understand a person or an issue or really anything for that matter, just looking at one side or one perspective. So, my blog with Psychology Today is called The Cube. I also have a YouTube channel called Mind Cube 3D, where I have videos, some of which are related to the articles that I've written. Other videos are independent, but it's with the same point in mind, showing people different perspectives of the same thing. So the email address, I have a few different email addresses, but I guess the one I'll give out for this purpose is my MindCube3D email address. It's mindcube3d@gmail.com. And I'll provide that, I guess, to Mike at the end if you want. So you can feel free to email me there. And I guess if you have any other questions, either about things that I spoke about on this episode or about any of my articles, that's a good place to get in touch with me. I'm also on LinkedIn if you want to hit me up on LinkedIn.
Okay. Yeah, and I will have all that information. I'm gonna add it to the show once we do the editing piece of it, so they'll be able to find it as well. It also will be in the descriptions below, so they can get in touch with you. We want them to find you and get in touch with you because really some of the ideas that you have are really fantastic, and I know it's going to help a lot of men. So I really applaud you for what you're doing, especially your men's group and your work that you're doing with your psychotherapy and all that. Thank you for doing that. And I really appreciate it. You even coming on the show to share that. And feel free anytime you want to come back on the show. And I'm going to find another article. I'm going to be let you know to bring it back up and have you back on the show.
Will do. And thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you. Thank you for the opportunity to talk a little bit about some of my work. And also, thank you for the work that you do, because you have a gift and you're using that gift to do some good in the world. In this case, providing guidance to men, young and old, to live more fulfilling lives, to have better relationships with each other as well as with the women in their lives. So thank you for that. We're all a beneficiary of that, Mike.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is our show for today. And I really want to thank John for coming on the show and providing that information that he has. And it's really, we as men have to be a little bit more vulnerable. A little bit. It doesn't mean our masculinity shrinks any. We just have to learn to balance, as John mentioned. We have to be able to balance it all. So here we try to give you the best knowledge of all that, so that way you can tweak who you are and so that you can be the best version of yourself. And that's what I want, and that's what I'm sure all your people in your circle want, for you to be the best you can be. So ladies and gentlemen, if you have not subscribed to the show, please go to the Father Show with Mike Thompson YouTube channel and click on that subscription button. And while you're there, hit that notification bell. And also, don't forget to tell someone else that we're here, that we're doing this, and we have people like John that is coming on the show from Stony Brook, and his company is Stony Brook Psychotherapy and Wellness. And you seek him out if you need the help, if you need to talk to him. And he's got that men's group. So if you're out in the Stony Brook area, please go by and see him. Check out the men's group there. And if you are looking for other resources, please go to thefathershowwithmikethompson.com, click on resources, and there you will find resources that can help you in your day-to-day life, and that's what it's all about. So ladies and gentlemen, until I see you next week, God bless you all. Have a great week, and I look forward to seeing you then.